Welcome to Rotoviz Radio. You are listening to episode 23. My name is John Moore, and with me is Matt Friedman. Matt, how are you?
I'm doing well. Good week of football, a lot of high-scoring games. I want to thank the guests we had on our last podcast, Scott Pianowski and John Paulson, and we've got some great guests coming up on this show. John, how are you doing?
I'm doing great, Matt, and you're right. We do have some exciting guests. Up first, we have Chris Raybon. You know him from Draft Day Consultants and 4for4.com. He's going to talk about his process for evaluating DFS plays on a weekly basis. And then we've got Pat Daugherty. You know him as Roto Pat from Roto World. Pat is going to talk about this week in the NFL, as well as his methods for weeding through the NFL's information, making projections, and trying to make the best lineups he can every week. But first, Matt, there are a couple things that I wanted to touch on from this week's action. Up first for me, and I know this is a couple years old concept by now, but the late round, bottom of the barrel discount quarterbacks continue to come through. For example, in one dynasty league that I'm in, of I think about 40 plus quarterbacks that are owned, Kyle Orton is the only quarterback who's seeing field time who's not owned. And what did he do this week? He had 4 touchdowns. Even guys like Zach Mettenberger, Derek Carr, who were rookies, had more passing yards than Peyton Manning this week. And Manning had a great week. He had 286 yards and a strong touchdown number. But that late round quarterback, if you can find them, they're out there every single week, values to be had, and cheap plays for adding value to your roster. Matt, what did you notice?
Well, kind of on the topic of late round quarterback, I've been using Roethlisberger in one of my leagues, kind of streaming him with other options. But the Steelers' offense has just kind of emerged. And we heard that in the preseason that they were going to go in the more up-tempo offense. They were going to, I guess, Todd Haley was going to unleash Ben Roethlisberger and let him throw a little bit more. And we definitely saw that this week. Le'Veon Bell has continued to be a presence in the passing game. He doesn't get as many rushing yards or rushing attempts as you would want, but he continues just to pound out 100-yard scrimmage games each week. Obviously, Antonio Brown, one of the best wide receivers in the league, and each week he seems to score a touchdown and make miraculous catches. And then finally, the emergence of Martavis Bryant, a guy who in the first month and a half of the season was inactive and really didn't see the field. The fact that he's kind of come out of nowhere, I think he's going to provide potentially an additional weapon for that offense that will make them all the better.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and just to Le'Veon Bell, over almost to 1,100 total yards from scrimmage so far. Only 2 touchdowns, though. It seems like that number has got to climb. I know I said that a couple weeks ago, but right now, pending DeMarco Murray's performance tonight, Bell is the leader in the clubhouse until DeMarco finishes in yards from scrimmage so far this season. But Matt, switching over, another thing that I noticed this week was coming down the stretch in that Eagles-Cardinals game, Jordan Matthews, it seemed like they were trying to go out of their way to get him the ball. Specifically, 2 of the final 3 plays of the game when the Eagles were going in to try to win that game, Matthews got the target. Even throughout the second half, very specific plays that looked like they were designed to get Jordan the ball. I know that for Team Rotoviz, we're very high on Jordan Matthews. He's someone to be excited about. And this week, it just kind of stood out to me. So far, he and Riley Cooper have been going sort of neck and neck as a percentage of that passing offense. And I'm just curious to see at what point that tips and Matthews surpasses Cooper on a weekly basis from a production standpoint. Matt, anything else?
Yeah, so we have Rotoviz. If you go to our homepage, rotoviz.com/radio, we have a tip jar, PayPal tip jar. If you like what you hear, you can give us a tip. And for tippers who actually ask us fantasy questions, we will answer them on the podcast. So one recent tipper asked, after Emmanuel Sanders' kind of miraculous outburst last Thursday night, is it time to sell Sanders in Dynasty? My inclination on this is actually, well, I guess no. Personally, I think not. But and part of that is because I believe that his production is real. I think that obviously he's not going to get 3 touchdowns a game, but I do think that he can finish the season with, roughly speaking, around 1,200 receiving yards and anywhere from 7 to 10 touchdowns. So I think if you believe in his production, he's a guy you want to keep in Dynasty, especially because maybe depending on the league, you wouldn't be likely to get the value in a trade for his production. If you think that his production is really fluky, then obviously I think it's time to sell. John, do you have any thoughts on that?
Yeah, I do, Matt. And here's what I'm looking at. I'm looking at the fantasy efficiency app at Rotoviz. So far this season, Emmanuel Sanders has 24% of the Broncos' targets. So let's just say that we're using 24% or 25%, 1/4 of the Broncos' passing offense as sort of a proxy. We're getting 1/4 of Peyton Manning's production, which to this point in the season has been about 300 yards per game. So for Sanders, that would mean about 75 yards per game. And Manning's going for about 3 touchdowns per game. So that might mean that over the course, over a 3-game course, he might catch 2 touchdowns. So, maybe 0.6 touchdowns per game, about 75 yards per game. That's kind of what you're looking at with Emmanuel Sanders, which if you compare him to other players right now, that puts him in the top 15 wide receivers as kind of the downside. Yes, his current ranking is in the top 10, Emmanuel Sanders is, but even just on the sheer role that he has in the offense, you can't help but think that top 15 wide receiver numbers are what he's sort of locked into for as long as Peyton Manning is the quarterback and he's receiving about that 25% of the passing offense number. And for that, I don't know if you can really get the appropriate value back. So I would hold Emmanuel Sanders. That's just kind of my take. It sounds like Matt and I are in agreement. But getting on to this week's episode, as I mentioned before, up first, we've got Chris Raybon from 4for4 and Draft Day Consultants to talk about his daily fantasy sports wisdom. He had some great stuff going on Twitter recently, so we brought him on to ask him more in depth about that. And then following him, we have Patrick Daugherty, who you know from Roto World. He has all sorts of wisdom about Week 8 NFL action, his season-long predictions and their updates, and also how he sets his weekly lineups. You won't want to miss that. So let's get on to episode 23. Welcome to the show, Chris Raybon, who you know on Twitter at Chris Raybon. He is a consultant for Draft Day Consultants. He's a contributor at 4for4, and he's a pocket square enthusiast. Chris, what's going on?
What's going on, guys? Happy to be here.
Thanks for your time. We really appreciate it. So
thanks for having me.
Yeah, up first, what caught your eye in Week 8?
In Week 8, the thing that really caught my eye was the pricing on the different sites. I thought the pricing on FanDuel was incredibly tight, and the pricing on DraftKings was pretty much the opposite. It was incredibly loose, and on a to a lesser extent Draft Day as well. But that's really what caught my eye. Was just for people that play on multiple sites, especially, it was just such different pricing, and a lot more difficult to create a great lineup on FanDuel this week, in my opinion.
Mm-hmm. So speaking about the weekly DFS lineups, you contribute to 4for4.com a couple of weekly articles looking at player pricing. Beyond that, last Saturday you were dropping DFS wisdom on your Twitter account. For anyone who didn't see that, I thought that was some really enlightening discussion about how you think about weekly points targets for GPPs and tournaments and how you go about building your rosters to achieve those marks. Can you kind of walk us through what you were tweeting about and maybe expand on that a little bit?
Right, sure. So basically, when you're creating a GPP lineup, there's kind of a top score that you're aiming for, or a threshold that you're aiming for that you really need to hit in order to win that GPP, or at least to cash high in that GPP. Now, for what I was tweeting about was for the DraftKings Millionaire Maker specifically, you needed about a score of 250 points to have a realistic shot at winning. I think the winner the week before had 241, and the week before that had about 230. This week it was actually higher. I think it's going to be closer to 300. But what I was saying was that, okay, so you have a $50,000 salary cap, and let's just say you're trying to hit a score of 250. That means every player needs to kind of give you about 5 times his salary if you remove the 1,000. So, if a player costs 6,000, you need about 30 points from him. 6 times 5 is 30. If every player can do that in your lineup, then you're on pace to, hit that 250. However, DraftKings, the pricing was really loose, as I mentioned before. So there were a lot of great so-called value plays in the 3,000 and the 4,000s, really kind of close to minimum price plays that were attracting a lot of attention. And I'll give an example. One of them I think was pretty popular was Travaris Cadet. He was the $3,000, the minimum price. And, a lot of people said, well, Pierre Thomas is out. Cadet looks like a great value. And I'm going to play him in the Millionaire Maker. And what I was tweeting was saying, you basically need every slot in your lineup to kind of be able to hit about 30 points, because if you just simply play a bunch of great value plays that can hit that 5x multiplier, you're going to kind of cap the ceiling of your lineup without realizing it. For example, if you're playing Travaris Cadet at $3,000 on the basis that 15, which is 3 times 5, 15, is a realistic target for him, which I think it is. I think, I don't think he got there yesterday, but I think 15 was a realistic target for Cadet to hit. He'd need about, maybe 5 or maybe about 6 catches for about 70 yards and maybe 20 rushing yards, and he'd hit 15 points. And, that's definitely doable. But I was saying you actually need even those low salary plays to hit about 30 points, because you're as you go higher with, if you play a really low price player, that means on the opposite side of that, you're probably going to be playing at least one stud. And, the likelihood of your stud now having to a guy that's cost maybe 8,000-9,000, the likelihood of that guy scoring 40 or 50 points is a lot lower than you finding 2 players who can score 30 each. It's just hard for any football player, period, no matter how good he is, to put up 40 or 50 fantasy points. It took Russell Wilson a historic performance of 100 rushing yards and 300 passing yards to go above 40. It took it happened a couple of times this week with quarterbacks, but there were historic performances that aren't very likely on a week-to-week basis, especially when you're counting on them, just as a salary multiplier. So I was saying, rather than, get all these value plays in your lineup, which are good values on a dollar per point basis, because what you're doing there is you're probably just end up building great cash game lineups, because you're finding players that are great values on a dollar per point basis, but you're not necessarily finding players that have or player pairings that have the ceiling necessary to actually finish first in a tournament.
Chris, that was fascinating. Can you share with us, kind of going off of that, some of the fundamentals of being a good GPP/tournament player in DFS?
Okay, one of the most important things, and I think a lot of people know this, is you want to create situations that are volatile and that are related. So you want to stack a quarterback and and one of his receivers, whether it's a wide receiver or a tight end. In some cases, both. But I think actually to win a large scale GPP, you generally want to stick to just a quarterback with one of his receivers. I know Peyton Manning, somebody won with Peyton Manning, Julius Thomas, and Demarius, but that was like a historical performance that's very unlikely to repeat itself. But you want to do that. And then another thing I think that's really big is looking at, or at least trying to have some idea of ownership percentages. Now, and I'll tell you how to use these, because it's not just it's called a contrarian play. A contrarian play would be picking somebody that's not very highly owned, that you expect to do well. So a contrarian play is not just picking a player that you don't expect to do well, and that's why he'll be well owned. There's no point in that. But for example, I'll give you a perfect example from yesterday, where I think it was really a good opportunity to exploit. Jordy Nelson was priced at 7,800 on DraftKings, and Antonio Brown was priced at 8,000. So that's a $200. Nelson was $200 lower, and he had the better matchup on paper against the Saints, and he was owned about 39.5% of entrants in the Millionaire Maker used Nelson, and I think about 7% owned Brown, or 8%. So you're talking about 5 times the amount of people use Nelson than use Brown. Now, yes, Nelson was the better play. He had the better matchup, but he wasn't 5 times more likely to put up more points than Antonio Brown. He was maybe a few percentage points more likely to put up a better game than Antonio Brown, but he was owned as if he was 5 times more likely. In that situation, you always want to exploit that by playing the player who you expect to be owned less, because, in reality, there's not, but for the upside, the ceilings of Antonio Brown and Jordy Nelson in any game, they're not that different. The upside of both is tremendous. They're two of the best receivers in the league. They're both threats to go for over 100 yards, multiple touchdowns, and 10 reception type of guys. So in situations like that, where you can kind of predict that, hey, there's one guy that I think, a lot of people will be on because he has a great matchup on paper, and he's similarly priced to somebody else who also is a very good player with a very high upside that maybe doesn't have as good a matchup on paper. You always want to go with the lower owned guy, because say Nelson went off, you're still tied with 40% of other people, but say Brown just beat him by 1 point. Now you're ahead of over 90% of people, because that didn't have Brown in their lineup. And that's actually what happened yesterday. The people who played Brown got rewarded. Well, 40% of people who played Nelson, their lineups are probably stuck somewhere in the middle of the pack.
Hey, Chris, just as a follow-up to that, I'm wondering, do you build your lineup with the receiver first or the quarterback first if you think that stacking is the must-use strategy?
I think that varies. That depends on pricing. So yesterday, for example, with my Antonio Brown, Ben Roethlisberger stack, what really caught my eye was Ben Roethlisberger's cheap price. He was, I think, 5,800, which is, really, really cheap. And in a situation like that, it's like, okay, there's not a lot of risk to playing Ben, period. And if I can stack him with one of the best receivers in the game, and at kind of a discount, let's do it. Same thing with Foles and Macklin. We're both very mid-price guys. So I think it really depends on price. It depends on the price and then the matchup in general. Some weeks you'll just say, okay, this quarterback is a great matchup, or this quarterback is underpriced. Who do I think his number one receiver is? Which one of his receivers is most likely to go off? Because here's something a lot of people don't know. A lot of people that play DFS are kind of into the idea of weekly consistency and trying to, I think people are starting to realize that certain positions are more consistent than others. But here's an interesting thing, is that passing yardage is pretty much one of the most consistent statistics on a weekly basis. It stays a lot closer to a player's passing yardage deviates a lot less from his average than any other stat of any other player, including, passing touchdowns, receiving touchdowns, receptions, receiving yards, rushing yards. So if you start with passing yards and say, okay, I expect this quarterback to throw for a lot of yards, then you can kind of go from there. So I guess it would be a little tilted toward looking at quarterbacks, but if you can start with quarterback passing yards and then say, okay, like for example, Tom Brady yesterday, he was somebody that I thought he was a good bet to throw for a lot of yards against the Bears, so I said, okay, now which receivers are most likely to get those yards? Of course, Gronk is the first bet, but I think Brandon LaFell was in play. If you thought that Tom Brady was going to do well, I think Brandon LaFell should have been in play for you. And he actually went off just because you've seen Brandon LaFell get a bunch of deeper targets lately. You've seen him more involved, and I think a lot of more people played Edelman, but Edelman's kind of more consistent. Short yardage receiver, but LaFell is a guy who can really rack up yardage because he gets a few more like intermediate to deep targets. So I think it can vary depending on week to week basis. But I think if you can start out with just looking at projected passing yards and go from there, I think it would be beneficial to start out with a quarterback. But there's also certain cases where there's just a really good receiver and you expect him to do well. For example, you could play Ben Roethlisberger anytime he's cheap, just because Antonio Brown is such a beast. Antonio Brown will single-handedly lift Ben's passing statistics up, just like when Josh Gordon comes back, he could single-handedly propel Brian Hoyer's passing stats up, or Manziel if he's starting, or whoever it might be. So there's multiple ways to go about that.
Chris, lots of good stuff there. Each week you contribute a DFS article to 4 for 4. Can you tell us a little bit about how you build your projections for those articles?
Well, actually, my projections are the 4 for 4 projections themselves are done by a guy named John Paulson. He's at Twitter at 4for4 John. And then I kind of go off those, and I tweak them, personally myself. So I'm tweaking them just based on film I'm watching, little things I'm picking up, injuries, little things I'm picking up. And one thing I really do with projections, once I have a baseline set, is I think it's very important, if you're really serious about trying to exploit certain pricing and certain matchups, is kind of put yourself in the shoes of a coach. Of a coach on an NFL team, and say, okay, what matchup would I likely, especially at wide receiver, quarterback receiver, projections. It's kind of like, okay, if I was a coach, if I was an offensive coordinator, what matchup would I attack? Who's injured on the defense? How would I go after this? And I kind of go from there as far as kind of tweaking the projections and then deciding what players to ultimately highlight in the article.
We're talking with Chris Raybon, who you can find on Twitter at Chris Raybon. He is a consultant for Draft Day Consultants and a contributor at 4for4.com. So Chris, transitioning over to this Draft Day Consultants project that you're involved with, this basically includes providing draft day help, weekly coaching. Seeing as we're at the midpoint of the fantasy season right now, what have been the biggest surprises to you for both better and worse so far?
I think some things I was surprised about were the kind of the lack of success of some of the running backs on the higher powered offenses early in this year, specifically Eddie Lacy and Monte Ball before he got hurt. I think that was really surprising. I thought those guys would do a little better just because of how good those offenses were. But then again, I didn't expect, for example, the Packers offense to be, basically shut down by a defense like the Lions early in the year. And I think Lacy's coming along now, but I was surprised at that. And I was also surprised at, really surprised that Doug Martin hasn't been able to get it going at all. I know, Tampa's having a lot of struggles with their offensive line, but I thought their offensive line would actually be, okay. I didn't think it'd be this bad, and I didn't think Martin would be this bad. I think he's just not really running well. If you're watching, if you have seen any of their games, he's not running well, and I just didn't expect that. After how good of a start to his career he had. I know he got hurt last year, but it wasn't a leg injury, so I didn't expect his injury to really affect him. I don't know if it is in any way or not, but he's just not really a good running back right now. And as far as players that have surprised me, I think Jeremy Maclin has been a big surprise. I didn't expect him to come off that injury and do so well so soon in Chip Kelly's offense. I thought he would be kind of a downgrade, kind of a poor man's Deshaun Jackson, but he's actually been able to do it all I think he leads the NFL in deep targets, and in addition to that, he's averaging about 10 targets a game. He's pretty much their go-to receiver at every single part on the field, and that was really a positive and surprising development for like a guy you could get middle to late round, pretty much middle rounds of the draft.
Who are a few players that you're looking to buy right now, and who are some guys you're looking to sell?
Well, to buy, I would all the stud receivers that have either been kind of quiet lately or are a little banged up right now. Specifically, Calvin Johnson, AJ Green, and Julio Jones. The NFL is a game where everybody's going to get injured almost at some point in the season. And these guys are banged up right now. And, every week it's kind of, they're questionable. Are they going to play? I know Julio's been playing, but he hasn't produced as much since that game against Tampa Bay earlier in the year. But these guys are potential week winners and league winners. And you know, they're resting Calvin, you know, till after the bye, so he should be healthier. You know, AJ, he won't be 100% all season, but he's going to be good enough to play. And you know, Julio has been playing this whole time, and he should be getting healthier. And I think if you have if anyone's just kind of desperate and willing to sell low on guys like that, I think, you know, it'd be a perfect time to buy, because you know, those guys can potentially blow up for, you know, 150 yards and 2 touchdowns in any week, and that could win you a playoff week. That could win you your game trying to make the playoffs if you're on the brink. So I think at this point, if you're in a position where you need a boost, I'd definitely be selling out to get those studs. With Sean McCoy, another guy, his offensive line has been decimated by injury, but they're going to get healthier. And I think I think basically anybody, you know, who's a bona fide stud, who has done it in the past, who's just going through a rough time right now. I think recency bias is so prevalent in fantasy. People are really judging by the last week, the last 2 weeks. You can really make a killing by getting these guys. And then selling, one guy I'd sell just based off what happened yesterday is Larry Fitzgerald. I think we've seen what kind of player he's going to be this year. He's going to be their possession guy. He had an 80-yard touchdown yesterday, but that wasn't on a deep route. That was on a short possession route where the Eagles just happened to miss a tackle, and then they took some bad angles and couldn't catch up to him. And you know, an 80-yard touchdown is one of the rarest occurrences in the NFL. So, you know, it's not like he got, you know, 150 yards by chunks of 20, 30-yard gains. You know, he's basically just doing his same old possession receiver thing, except for he got a long touchdown. I think people will look at that and combine that with his past pedigree and think, oh, Larry Fitzgerald's back. And I know Michael Floyd had a slow game yesterday. He got a little banged up, and he wasn't really as involved after he banged his knee or shin, whatever it was, on the turf. But I think, you know, going forward, Larry Fitzgerald is just going to be exactly what he was through the first 7 weeks of the season. So I think that's a good sell. I think Shane Vereen is a guy I'd be selling on. I think I know he didn't have a great game yesterday, but he had a monster game the week before, and I think that's how it's going to be all season. I think in a fantasy league, you're kind of looking for guys who are a little more consistent. And Vereen, I don't think his role is really good. I think he's going to still be the same guy he was prior to Ridley's injury, but I think some people think he might be, you know, he's going to be the guy now with Ridley out. But I think that's actually going to be more of a combination of Jonas Gray and to some extent James White. And then the last guy I'd sell is Ben Tate. And you know, I know he saved his fantasy day yesterday with a late 5-yard rushing touchdown, but his last 3 games, I don't think he's been able to crack 3 yards per carry, and that's not about him necessarily. It's the Browns lost a really good player on their offensive line, which is center Alex Mack. He was a really good run blocker, one of the top run blockers according to Pro Football Focus, and they haven't been able to run the ball period since. And when you combine his injury with the fact that Kyle Shanahan's kind of been like, I really want one of our running backs to take control of the job, and you know, Ben Tate really hasn't seized control of it, whatever factors it's due to. You know, I think they have nothing to lose by kind of giving the younger guys, Crowell and West, more burn just to see how they look. I think Ben Tate might just devolve into a committee back on a team that is struggling to run. So I'd be looking to sell him.
Hey, Chris, one last question, then we'll let you go. Thank you so much for your time. What is a bold prediction that you have about a team and a bold prediction that you have about a player for the rest of the season?
Okay, I'll start with a player. My bold prediction for a player, and this wouldn't sound so bold if we said it at the beginning of the season, but like I said, recency bias is just so prevalent. I think LaShawn McCoy will lead the NFL in rushing for the second half of the season. I think his offensive line will be a little in better shape, and I think just the more and more we're seeing of Nick Foles, we're starting to see that he's really not the 27 touchdown 2 interception guy that he was last year. He's more of a guy, you know, he'll be erratic from time to time, and I think Chip Kelly's always been a run-based coach, and I think as their offensive line gets healthier, I think McCoy, you know, he's not going to be bottled up every game. You know, it's also some bad luck. You know, if McCoy hasn't broken some huge runs, and so all of a sudden, you know, his stats don't look that good. But you know, I think a lot of factors combined, I think LaShawn McCoy can lead the NFL in rushing in the second half. And as far as teams, my bold prediction will be the Baltimore Ravens will be in the AFC championship game. I think they're probably flying under the radar a little, but I think they're very solid in pretty much every aspect of football, and I think they're a really good team, and they're capable of beating a Manning or a Brady or a Luck on any given Sunday. Even though maybe Joe Flacco's not the quality of them, and maybe their team isn't even up to the quality of those teams, I think they can beat them on any given Sunday, and I think you'll see them in the AFC Championship game.
I like it. Bold indeed. On that second one especially. Thanks so much for your time, Chris. You take care.
Thank you guys for having me. Appreciate it.
As has become our custom in recent weeks, Matt and I are going to take a few minutes to review one of the apps at rotoviz.com, specifically the buy low machine. As a reminder, if you want to get access to the apps and the articles for the rest of the season, if you sign up through rotoviz.com/radio, you can get rest of season access for just $9. It's down $1 more this week from last week. So it's a great time to get in on that. You can get access to all the apps and the articles if you go through rotoviz.com/radio. So Matt, getting into the buy low machine, we're going to look at the rest of the season. We're going to set the filter to week 9 through 16, the rest of the fantasy season, and go through and pick out one player that we like at each position to buy low on right now for the stretch run. So Matt, why don't you start us off with the quarterbacks and let us know who you see as a buy low candidate.
Yeah, I think Teddy Bridgewater with Minnesota might be a decent buy low candidate. If you look at the buy low machine, you see that Minnesota for the rest of the season has the fourth easiest quarterback schedule. It looks like Cordarrelle Patterson is starting to emerge a little bit. I think Greg Jennings and Jarius Wright are good complementary pieces. And I also believe that Kyle Rudolph will be returning at some point soon. So I think he's a decent buy low as he continues to emerge as a quarterback.
Yeah, I like that. I'm going to go with Cam Newton as my buy low. He has the most favorable schedule moving forward. Just reading through real quick. New Orleans, Philadelphia, Atlanta, Minnesota, New Orleans, Tampa Bay, Cleveland for the fantasy championship week. He's coming off a disastrous performance against Seattle, 171 passing yards, 0 touchdowns passing or rushing, 1 interception, and just 24 rush yards. So this is about as low as I think his value can get. Obviously, the upside there is that his team gets a little healthier around him, that he schedule eases up and he gets more familiar with the receivers. So Cam Newton is the guy that I would try to buy low off of his really lousy Week 8 performance. Matt, switching over to the running backs, who do you see there?
I think someone in Cleveland, and I'm not really sure who. Right now Ben Tate is the starter. Terrence West, played as the second running back off the bench this week. And the coaches in Cleveland have recently said they're concerned about Isaiah Crowell's ball security, but I think you want someone from this backfield, and I think Crowell will probably be the guy to emerge. Cleveland has the second easiest running back schedule going forward. If you looked at the efficiency app at Rotoviz, you'd see that Crowell is, I think, number 5 or number 6 on the list in terms of most expected points most points over the expected total that a running back would get based on his touches. And Crowell really hasn't gotten many touches, but he's been highly efficient so far. So I think someone in Cleveland will probably end up going off in the second half of the season. I'm not sure who it is, but I would bet on it being Crowell.
All right, and then on my side of the ledger, the player that I'm looking at is Lorenzo Taliaferro from the Ravens. Had a bigger game this last week against the Bengals, scored 2 touchdowns, had about 70 yards from scrimmage, splitting duties with Justin Forsett. He was active over Bernard Pierce, And if you don't know about Lorenzo Taliaferro, there's a great article at Rotoviz about him. But we're talking about a big physical back that is tremendously agile. And I can really see kind of being a nice, like ground and pound, old school kind of running back for the Ravens coming down the stretch when they get, into those divisional games late in the season, tough runner. And again, looking at their schedule, it is, I think, the maybe 5th or 6th most favorable headed down the stretch. Looking at the playoff weeks, 14, 15, 16, they've got Miami, Jacksonville, and Houston. So some plus matchups there. So Lorenzo Taliaferro is who I would try to get for the stretch run on my roster. Matt, kicking it over to the wide receivers. What do you have for us there?
Yeah, so if you look at the buy low machine, you see that Atlanta has the second most favorable schedule for wide receivers moving forward. Julio Jones has now gone 5 straight weeks without scoring a touchdown. He also, I believe, hasn't gone over 100 yards in that period, although I need to double check. But he has a bye week coming up. Whoever is rostering Julio Jones is probably hurting right now. I think if you could make a reasonable trade offer, you might have a shot at getting him. And I think his production moving forward could really improve based on his strength of schedule.
Right. Matt, the guy that I'm looking at is going to appear in everyone's sell high list this week. And even already, I think on Yahoo, his player blurb says sell him. And that is Mohamed Sanu. And this might sound a little contrarian to think that Mohamed Sanu is actually someone to try to buy right now. But the Bengals have the 6th most favorable receiver schedule for the rest of the fantasy season. It's sort of going to be a popular thing to sell him this week with the expectation that AJ Green is coming back next week. But what concerns me is that, one, maybe AJ Green can't come all the way back. He's going to be back, but he's not going to quite be the same player. I think there's probably something to be said about Andy Dalton learning to have that separation from AJ Green and learn how to use his other targets and distribute the ball evenly. With Green back, I think Sanu will continue to still see plenty of targets, but probably receive more favorable matchups, not having the number one corner as he has the last couple of weeks. And then also going back to our conversation with Sports Injury Predictor from much earlier in the podcast, foot injuries and lower leg injuries kind of work their way up is the way it was described, in that they can create other issues for the rest of the leg. So maybe at some point AJ Green misses some more time later this season and Mohamed Sanu is the wide receiver 1 for the Bengals and Andy Dalton's top target. So I'd be interested to see if I could almost buy high, I guess, on Mohamed Sanu at this point. And then finally, looking at the tight ends, what do you have for us there, Matt?
So I'm going with New York, which, I wrote my sort of, my article on Larry Donnell at the beginning of the year on how he could be a legitimate red zone option. And he had his fantastic 3-touchdown game about a month ago. He hasn't done much since, although this, 2 weeks ago, he had one large game, but then had 2 fumbles. But moving forward, the New York Giants have the 5th easiest schedule for the tight end position. Victor Cruz obviously is out for the rest of the season. I think that they will look to incorporate the tight end position more into the game plan moving forward. Okay.
My guy is going to be Austin Seferian-Jenkins, who, if you follow me on Twitter or read stuff over at Rotoviz, I love him. He's one of the most dominant young tight end prospects to come out. Over the last 4 games, he's slowly been more incorporated in the Buccaneers offense. 7 targets, 3 targets, 5 targets, 4 targets. Finally got on the scoreboard this last week against the Vikings with his first NFL touchdown. Meanwhile, the Bucs have one of the more favorable tight end schedules coming down the stretch, the 8th highest rated tight end schedule coming down for the rest of the season. So he's a guy that, people in your league don't follow college as much. Maybe they don't know who he is or what he's about, but I can tell you he's a dominant prospect, in my opinion, the best in the 14 draft. And if he can continue to establish himself in this offense, he could be a player that you want to own for the rest of the season. So with that, that's our quick spin at the buy low machine. Hopefully you got a couple ideas for players to possibly add or to target in trades this upcoming week. If you want to do some of your own experimenting with the Buy Low machine or any of the other apps at Rotoviz, be sure to check out rotoviz.com/radio. You can subscribe there for just $9 rest of season access, a discount that's only available to Rotoviz radio listeners, and you can get access to all these that can help put the data in your hands. So with that, let's keep the show moving. Welcome to the show, Patrick Daugherty, who you know on Twitter at RotoPat. He's an NFL writer for RotoWorld and NBC Sports. Pat, how are you today?
I'm doing well. I'm just kind of decompressing after another long Sunday, and thankful there weren't too many ACLs torn yesterday, and just kind of working up my gumption to face the week ahead. And I wish I was more excited about Monday Night Football tonight, but I don't really have anyone of consequence going in any of my fantasy leagues, so kind of a low-key Monday around here.
Fair enough. So, Pat, you just did the morning after column at RotoWorld. What were some of the performances or developments in Week 8 that caught your eye?
Well, the impossible not to notice Rob Gronkowski kind of going full Rob Gronkowski on the Bears, and that was kind of, to me, the most exciting development. Even though I don't have a lot of Gronk shares this year, I mean, it was kind of sad seeing him early in the season. Just didn't look like the real Gronk. Kind of looked like a guy at the end of the line. And then to see the progress he's made in only 2 months yesterday. I mean, he threw down Ryan on his third touchdown. He threw down Ryan Monday, like he was me. And I was like, wow, like this guy's like actually back. And yeah, that was kind of my favorite takeaway from Sunday.
Mm-hmm. You had a great tweet. I think it said that Rob Gronkowski just made Ryan Mundy the littlest brother in the world.
Yeah, it's because I'm not even a very big person. I'm only like 5'10", but growing up, my little brother was always like really small. He was close in age to me, but he was always like 5 or 6 inches shorter than me, and that it kind of just reminded me of me playing football in my backyard when I was like 14 with my brother, and it's kind of like tossing him around. You don't usually see an NFL player get worked the way that Monday did.
Right on. So you write football content, but you're also a big time baseball fan. In terms of playing fantasy, are there general principles that you think cross over between the two sports?
Yeah, I wish I had like a really good answer for that, because there are, but I mean, to me, it's just like real obvious stuff. I mean, it's kind of hard. It's kind of like apples and oranges, because injuries are just so prevalent in football, and you always have to just plan for every contingency, kind of like with your star players. And pitcher injuries are pretty big in baseball, and it was a big injury year in general, but usually it's a little easier to kind of have a long-term plan in baseball. But with that being said, still always, both sports, I always try to go young, always try to go for upside. I mean, who doesn't want upside? But I usually tend to skew towards it. I just love the young players, and so sometimes that's actually kind of to my detriment. It causing me to miss out on maybe some value veterans. But my approach in both leagues is usually like get as much young upside as possible.
I definitely feel you on the young upside part. You do rankings each week at RotoWorld, and according to Fantasy Pros, you were one of the most accurate rankers last year. You were actually number 7. That's 7 out of, over 100. Can you tell us about your process in making your weekly projections?
I wish it was more scientific than it was, to be honest. And it's kind of a lot of a gut, and it's kind of a lot of feel. And this year, it's probably why I'm not doing as well. I'm not going to disclose where I am this year, but it's not in the top 10. Hoping to make a charge of that here at the end of the year. But I mean, the main thing I try to focus on is, I'm not really any different than anyone else, but the information I can quote unquote control. So the single probably most important thing is this workload. I mean, aside from talent, of course, but I mean, there's so many variables in football, because the depth chart changes week to week. I mean, coaches are fickle, players are playing hurt, but you don't know how hurt they are. So I just try to zero in on, if I know so-and-so is, quote unquote guaranteed for 15 touches. That's kind of what I view as the most important information. And so sometimes last year, I remember a guy always had a lot higher than most, and I have no idea if this actually benefited me or hurt me or not, but it was like Kendall Wright, where it seemed like he was always much lower in everyone else's rankings, but I always just kind of had him higher because he was just such a consistent target machine, like 8 to 10 every week. And so maybe that's one difference between me and some other guys, where I think I give really heavy credence to workload. And like I said, maybe it doesn't always work out, but that's kind of the main thing I focus on.
10 years ago, the general consensus was that to win your league, you needed to have stud running backs. Now, with the NFL more of a passing league, lots of fantasy players focus on the wide receiver and tight end positions. What position do you think is the key to winning fantasy contests?
I mean, I honestly think it's still running back because, I kind of dabbled in, not in zero running back this year, but definitely one running back, maybe only one running back in my first 3 rounds. But with so many committees and so many injuries and so few every down guys, I still think it's kind of the most important to get, quote unquote, safe RB1. And as this year has proven more than ever, that's a fraught with peril. Like a guy even like Adrian Peterson, has played 1 game, but the pickings are so thin and receivers so deep right now. I just feel like it's easier to get receivers on the wire. I mean, you got to attack the wire early in the year regardless, but I just feel like, I don't know. To me, you still have to get a stud running back as the single most important foundation for a team. And I know not everyone agrees with that, but I'm going to go old school with that.
Pat, just a minute ago, you were talking about value veterans in the fantasy world. This past week, there were actually a lot of explosive performances by veteran wide receivers. Which ones do you think are representative of what we can expect moving forward? And who did you see as being more a 1-week fluke?
It's an interesting question. I mean, I would say I viewed Larry Fitzgerald as a fluke, but I would say I definitely viewed that as his ceiling. Obviously, he got off to a really slow start. I mean, I don't think 3 to 4 catches is kind of the real Fitz, where I kind of always thought he'd get going, but I definitely don't think, 150, 160 yards, whatever he had, is going to be, the quote unquote at the real Fitz on Twitter. I don't think he's coming back to like the, even like the wide receiver 2 ranks, but I think maybe he kind of proved that he can split the difference between his slow start and his big game yesterday. Maybe be like a Reggie Wayne, like 5 catches, 60 yards every week. And so, yeah, Fitz was the guy kind of most stuck out to me. That's probably going to be his best game of the year. And another guy kind of popped in my head was Brandon LaFell. And he kind of pushes the boundaries of the definition of veteran. But, he's been around 4 or 5 years now. And, yeah, he's a guy you never want to take seriously because he's always been kind of a letdown artist. But he's got about 4 or 5 catches, 4 or 5 weeks in a row, kind of flirting around 60, 70 yards every week, turning into a big touchdown threat. And I kind of think he's someone who could kind of sneakily become a wide receiver 3 for the season stretch run.
A quick follow-up. Do you have any thoughts on Emmanuel Sanders? He, absolutely went off last week with his 3 touchdowns. Obviously, 3 touchdowns a week isn't sustainable, but do you think over the course of the season, his kind of prorated production so far will be able to extrapolate?
That's a really interesting question. I mean, that's not one I've kind of fixated on. My main thought when I watch Emmanuel Sanders play is like, holy cow, the Steelers probably should have gotten a little more out of this guy. And I know it's with Peyton Manning, and Peyton can, kind of make anyone look like an all-pro, but he's another guy. I guess he's probably already had his best stretch of the year, but I mean, Peyton Manning supported 3 top 30 wide receivers last year. I mean, Eric Decker, I think, finished the year as the wide receiver 8. And, obviously we're not going to see many more multi-touchdown games from Emmanuel Sanders, but he's someone, I don't think he's going to fade from the top 15, top 16 conversation. And, maybe he'll have a few more. I think before last week, he maybe had 2, 3-ish catch performances in a row, and it's kind of bound to happen in Denver with so many mouths to feed. But I really don't think he's a fluke. I mean, he might be a sell high and that his value will never be higher, but I don't think he's a sell high and isn't a guy, I got to get rid of this guy because he's about to get exposed. I think he's legit.
And one more follow-up, Golden Tate, do you think he's going to be a guy who can actually sustain some of this production when Calvin Johnson returns?
Yeah, sure. I mean, he could be like I think I kind of come into the season, I kind of viewed him as maybe like a poor man's Pierre Garçon type, 5 or 6 catches, 70, 80 yards. And I feel like he was kind of underperforming maybe before Calvin got hurt, but I might be wrong about that. I think he was still having some decent weeks, but I mean, he's in the guy where he's definitely a sell high and that, he's never going to have more value. And if you're in a home league with, some people who aren't on Twitter 24 hours a day like us, he's probably a pretty good guy to unload. But yeah, I think he'll be a really high floor wide receiver 3 going forward. And you're kind of getting used to living in the penthouse these 100-yard weeks. Obviously, that's not going to keep up, but I think he'll remain very useful and maybe top 25.
We're talking with Patrick Daugherty. He's an NFL writer for RotoWorld and NBC Sports. You can find him on Twitter at RotoPat. So on the flip side, that was more the veteran conversation, but also a lot of rookies did well this last week too. Watkins, Cooks, Bryant, Dante Moncrief, John Brown, Allen Robinson, all had at least 80 yards and a touchdown. Which of these guys are you highest on moving forward?
I mean, definitely Sammy Watkins. I mean, he's kind of a guy who's been coming into his own the past few weeks, and it's kind of all the ingredients there. I mean, explosive young player. I mean, someone they gave up, King's ransom for. So they've been trying to force the issue with him all year. And earlier in the year, he wasn't as consistent. Was kind of playing banged up, kind of making mistakes. But now the kind of talent's coming into his own, and he's obviously got a much stabler quarterback situation, which it's crazy that Kyle Orton can be the guy to stabilize your quarterback situation, but so is the world we live in here. I think he's very legit. I mean, he's kind of almost a dark horse to finish as a wide receiver 1, and maybe it's possible this has been his best 2-game stretch, but he's someone I'm definitely believing in. And kind of the same thing with Brandon Cooks. I mean, probably more of a wide receiver 3, but for a rookie and a really explosive offense with a lot of veterans, I mean, he's locked into a lot of targets. I mean, they're not messing around with him. Kind of one of their most consistent players, and I'm definitely believing in him. And and then Dante Moncrief was a really, really, really impressive game yesterday. Kind of almost looked like a jumbo T.Y. Hilton, but he's one where I think he's got the talent to be an immediate impact. But Reggie Wayne's coming back, and they should give up on Akeem Nicks, but it doesn't seem like they've shown any inclination to kind of fully move on from him. So Moncrief's a guy I'm really intrigued by, but probably like a wide receiver 5, kind of end of bench fodder.
At the running back position, Week 8 was dominated by some older veterans, for instance, Foster, Forte, Charles Ingram, even Bradshaw. Which of these older guys do you trust most for the rest of the season?
I think it's pretty hard not to go with Matt Forte. I mean, a lot of really impressive guys with long track records there and monster seasons. But Matt Forte was kind of a guy who was kind of weird because he was looking like he was starting to have durability issues before Mark Trestman showed up in Chicago. But he's just taken on a massive workload and a massive beating these past 2 years. And, really he's never looked anything less than 100%. And, dual threat guy. I don't think he's still leading the NFL in receptions, but he was going into Week 8, and he's not going to stop catching passes. And when you have a guy who catches as many passes as him, that raises your weekly floor so much, and that kind of combined with his durability, I think he's kind of the easy call there.
Do you have any? You kind of mentioned concerns about guys breaking down. That just kind of brings to mind Arian Foster. Do you have any thoughts on him moving forward?
Yeah, I mean, it's a shame because, he's clearly still a truly elite talent, but, I'd be shocked if he doesn't miss any more games. I mean, just the injury history is so pervasive at this point with him. I mean, it's not a matter of when. I just think it's a matter of if, and which is kind of a conundrum because, with a guy like Arian Foster, he's probably literally carrying your team. So what do? Do you try to quote unquote sell high, or do you just ride him till the wheels fall off? And I think I'd kind of be inclined to do the latter. I mean, you just got to know. I mean, you got to be ready for when the injury happens. But he's a guy where he's producing at such a high level. I don't really view him as a good sell high.
Right, understood. On Sunday, when the news broke that Lorenzo Taliaferro was going to be Baltimore's goal line back in Week 8, you moved him all the way up to number 37, even though you already had Forsett ranked number 9. Taliaferro scored 2 touchdowns. He's looked dominant at points this season. What are your thoughts on him moving forward?
Well, my initial thought is I was pretty proud of having Forsett, so I kind of thought I was going to pull a fast one on everyone there, kind of be the visionary on Forsett for this week, and then naturally had one of his quietest weeks in probably like a month. But my thoughts on Taliaferro are just that they very clearly want to have a committee, and I thought I thought Forsett was still gonna be the big time leader of that last week, but I just thought they were gonna go really, really run heavy against the Bengals, who just been getting smoked by the run. And I thought even if Forsett got like 20 to 25 touches, Taliaferro would have pretty good shot at a couple of goal line carries, and that obviously happened. The Forsett part just didn't happen, but yeah, they're going to keep giving the Forsett the ball probably 15 to 20 times a game, but maybe it's kind of like an Andre Ellington situation where they don't want to have him taking those big hits near the goal line. And I think Sunday probably definitively settled the Bernard Pierce Taliaferro debate, and I think he'll be a nice RB3, touchdown dependent RB3 going forward.
So, Pat, in the preseason, you did a fantasy top 25 column at Roto World. With the season now about halfway over, are there any players who you think you radically misranked? And what, if anything, do you think could have been improved with your process?
Everything? No. I mean, I actually, looking back on my list, I was kind of surprised. I thought it might look even worse than it did. These things, you can be, the number one ranking stud, and you can look back 3 months later and it's kind of like, holy crap. But to me, the main thing that stuck out was there were a few guys I was really high on, but I think maybe I got too much in the crowd and the herd mentality and maybe didn't put him as high. I'm a huge T.Y. Hilton fanboy, and I looked back and I only had him at number 20. And, realistically, I don't really know how much higher I would have put him, but he was kind of a guy where I kind of deep down, I think I thought he was going to have a huge year, but I just maybe wasn't bold enough putting him high. And, a lot of ones I regret, but I was way, way too aggressive with Michael Floyd. I'm a little too smitten with him. I had him as my number 12 receiver, but looking back, I don't think there was any great flaw in my process. Doing these things, I was talking about with Evan Silva in the summer. It's kind of terrifying where you can have like the most logically sound list. And like this year, everyone thought there was a clear top 5 at running back. What was it? Peterson, Forte, Charles, McCoy, and I'm missing someone else out.
Maybe
Eddie Lacy.
Yeah, Eddie Lacy. To everyone, that was like the obvious top 5. It was just kind of a matter of how you ranked them. But it seemed so obvious in the summer. But even then, I knew that probably at least 3 of those guys wouldn't even finish in the top 10. The turnover's so great every year. But the problem is there's just no way to logically predict who are going to be the guys who fall off a lot of times. So you just kind of got to go with the best information you have. And the best information we have is those 5 guys are the clear top 5. Naturally, it hasn't worked out that way. So it's pretty humbling exercise looking back at these things.
Well, and then there's the other part of having your top 25 rankings, which is that they're out there for the world to see and find and say, hey, remember when you got that right or wrong? And so there's that probably frustration with
people never ever bring up when you're right. I can assure you of that. They only bring up when you're wrong. Pretty much every Sunday, I'll just discover a few random tweets from people I never heard of, bringing up some disastrous call I barely even remember. And obviously that's a pretty frustrating part of the job, but so is life. When you're required, you got to have a strong opinion on every player in the NFL. And sometimes it's going to lead to some really huge misses, but, a lot of times sometimes it'll lead, to really huge rights. You'll be extremely right on somebody, but, you're obviously going to be wrong. And that's a frustrating part, but it's just something you got to live with.
Mm-hmm. Right. And we'll ask everyone who's listening to find something that Pat got right and tweet at him at RotoPat and tell him that he did a great job and that you're so thankful.
Yeah, it's mid-season. It's about time for a confidence boost here. So.
You needed to make through the rest of the season.
It's about to get cold. Yeah, I need some fuel here.
Pat, one last question. Speaking of Twitter, you're a great follow there. I really enjoy kind of going through your timeline every so often. Who are the people on Twitter that you like to follow and you feel like you learn from?
Clearly biased, but the Roto World crew is, kind of by far, my number. Evan Silva, is the industry standard, and Leviton, Mincio, all the people associated, Mike Clay, new guy, Raymond Summerlin. I just love the Roto World crew. I feel like I learn so much from them every week, even though we're all kind of reading and doing the same things. It's just imagine the different perspectives. But then also I like the people who don't take it so seriously all the time, and I kind of like some humor mixed in. I think the absolute funniest guy on Twitter is college football writer Celebrity Hot Tub. He revealed his real name over the summer, Ryan Nanny, and if someone was asking me a non-NFL follow, he'd probably be the first guy I recommend. But I like guys who I want him to be informative, obviously, but I like the humor mixed in. Kind of Chris Burke from Sports Illustrated is another guy, really informative, but really good at some one-liners, and really big guys like Bomani Jones. Some people might not like because he goes off into so many different areas, but I kind of love how freewheeling his account is. So, but in general, I kind of like I don't want jokesters, but I like the lighter-hearted.
Mm-hmm. Good deal, Pat. Well, thank you so much for your time. You take care.
You too, guys. My pleasure.
Thank you for listening to this episode of Rotoviz Radio. Be sure to listen to Thursday's episode where Matt and I will dig deep into our fantasy football studs, duds, and sleepers of the week. If you want to ask us a question, please find us on Twitter at Rotoviz Radio, and we will answer the most interesting questions on Thursday's episode. And if you want to make your question look especially interesting, it doesn't hurt to ask it as you leave a tip in our PayPal tip jar. Thanks again for listening. Catch you on Thursday.